So hello, everyone. Thanks again for tuning in. This is Steve Taylor. I'm the lead advisor and founder over here at Merited Wealth, and you are listening to our podcast. And I call this one Thoughts in Growth Mode, wherein we pick a topic, we bring in an expert, we have a discussion for those out there, that are maybe not very familiar with the topic or those interested in learning more, to try to benefit you and go through it. I do have a version of a podcast. If you've listened to it before, we do an interviewing format about experiences as an entrepreneur and the like. So if you're listening, if it might interest you for a topic or to be a guest, please just reach out. So today's topic, I don't think it's that easy of a discussion, but it's something that comes up, unfortunately, a lot, and really what I've experienced in coming out of COVID, where everyone got locked down and we got forced together with our family, whether like it or not, and cocooned up in these homes, that certain people, brought them, and certain families brought them closer together. But then other ones, it had the opposite effect, right? And it was really, it's really been a challenging time. But before we launch in this conversation, I'm excited to have, because of the subject matter. It's not the best conversation, it's a tough one to have. But my guest and my expert here is Karen Lungarelli. Karen, can you give us a little intro? Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Hi, good morning, Steve. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I am a divorce and family law attorney. My office is based out of Miami, Florida, but we do practice throughout the entire state. And like you said, COVID has changed a lot, has changed a lot of people's perspectives, a lot of people's relationships, and the courts are very busy, but the good news is with the proper advice and the proper counseling, you can make it through.
You can make it through, yeah. So Karen, I wanted to start our conversation to kind of take the aspect somewhat out of it. It's hard, right? It's a reality of the situation, but if someone's at a point where they've tried everything to make the marriage work, counseling, everything like that, I don't want to downplay this at all, right? That's a very important part of the process, and it goes throughout. But I want to have the conversation to understanding that, okay, either one or maybe both, realize, okay, this is not working, right? This is not working. It's really sad, but this is not working. So when someone comes to that point, right, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the one party or the other or the like, when they're thinking, okay, we're going to get divorced. I know you probably don't get brought in this early, but if you do, or what advice would you give to someone that they've kind of come to that conclusion, this is kind of irreconcilable, and now we're kind of getting ready for what's to come?
Right. So when someone makes that decision, the best advice I can give them is to get informed. So we do come in early in the process. If someone is not fully ready to get divorced, I would still advise them to contact a family law attorney and ask those important questions. What's going to happen to my home? What's going to happen to my finances? Where are my kids going to be? That sort of stuff. There's a lot of questions and a lot of fear, particularly around finances, Steve. So you want to get that information, and you want to have an idea of what you may or may not be responsible for, what your obligations may or may not be, so you can make that informed decision. So you can make the best decision for yourself and your family, because even if you are divorced, when there are minor children involved, you're still going to have to figure out a new family unit going forward. And that includes finances too. So getting that information, talking to an attorney early on in the process is usually the best advice I can give someone, because that's going to help you make not just a decision, but an informed decision.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's great advice. And so, the reality of it is unfortunately many times there's one spouse that has kind of let all the finances be handled by the other spouse. And when I do planning with my clients, that's one of the first things we sit down and talk about is, listen, we can't do this. You can't just tell me he or she is going to be the one handling it. This needs to be a joint effort, right? This needs to be a joint effort to go through and have those talks, which I think is a really, potentially a good way early on if you're going to trying to reconcile, because all the arguments are about money, but they're really not. So one of these spouses is really just they haven't been well informed, right? They don't know where bank accounts are. They don't understand anything like that. So when that person comes to you, what do you tell them, or how do you kind of guide or coach them?
if I have the spouse who has less information or sometimes even no information about the finances, I would let them know that the process does involve financial discovery, right? And that they are going to be expected to answer certain questions. Their spouse is going to be expected to answer certain questions and provide discovery documents. But if you're in your attorney's office and you don't have any idea about your finances, the good news is we can help you get through that process and we can do the discovery process. But before you get there, like you said, Steve, sometimes a lot of people do break up. And one of the big reasons why marriages fall apart is finances. Either, they don't view money the same way, they don't use money the same way, someone spends too much, someone has too much debt, or they don't understand. So before you get to that point, have those conversations, because there is a lot of financial fear when there is an imbalance in incomes or access to cash and access to assets and wealth. So you want to have those conversations. And I think meeting, someone like you, meeting in your office, having those conversations is a great resource, because you can literally have the spouses talk about their finances and what does this look like? What if there's a catastrophic event? What if something, someone loses their job or something happens with the markets? So before you get to your divorce attorney's office, or before you start talking about divorce, start asking the questions today, right?
Yeah.
Even something as simple as, how much is our mortgage? Some people don't even know what
Where
they
is our
spend.
mortgage?
Right, where's our mortgage? Some people don't know what they spend day to day. If you want to keep a house, okay, well, how do you plan to keep the house if you don't know how much your house costs, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great idea, and I love that. Right, that's a big part of our process, is just getting all the information together when you have those two spouses that come together. So, in anticipation of this podcast, I spoke to my wife, right, and I said, hey, what do you think would be good questions to ask or topics to come up and stuff like that. And I think what happens though in many of those situations is it would be wonderful. I get the husband and spouse. We get here, we go through a kind of an open dialogue of what we have and where it is and everything in a very civil format. But I don't think that's quite often, right, how it comes down. So to someone who realizes they're kind of really at a disadvantage, and I think the concern would be about, okay, well, when we ring that bell, right, when we hire the attorney and everything like that, then kind of all gloves are off. So, kind of when they're at that stage, right, and they're trying to think, you make these great points. They're like, well, I just don't know. What do you tell them maybe prior to getting that bell rung, or any other steps there? Like, what are some basic things that you would advise them on, and ability to kind of garner that information?
Yeah. Know where your bank accounts are, right? Start there. What bank are you at, right? Do you have business accounts? Do you have individual accounts? Do you have joint accounts? Typically, most couples will have a joint account. And you can go to the bank and you can get copies of statements. You can go online if you don't know the online passwords. If there's a joint account, you can go to the bank, get those statements, and start there. Start seeing what money's coming in, what money's going out, how much are your credit card bills? Is there cash deposits? Are there large cash withdrawals? And you can start there piecing your financial picture together. Just start with a bank account, right? Start with something. And if something looks off, bring it to your attorney's attention. If something looks off, make a note about it. And just start there. Start looking at what's coming in and what's going out, and what sources of cash you have coming in, and where is it going to? Is it going to the mortgage? Is it going to the kid's school? Is it going to the car? Is it going to insurance? You can get a really good idea by just starting to look, just starting to get yourself informed. Go to the bank, get the statements, start going through them.
Yeah, that's great. Another piece I remember when I was practicing law, sometimes a probate estate, someone passed away and they'd come in and you didn't know what they had. And I would and the banks many times at that point got closed, but I would say, hey, give us a tax return. Let me see the tax return there, right? That's going to start showing dividends. That's going to show interest. That's going to show capital gains. That's going to give you accounts, right? And information where you can go start making phone calls and all the like on those. I think that's a great, the bank account's a wonderful place, and the tax return.
Yeah, I agree. I think a tax return is a great place to start as well. Some people might not have access to it, or they might not have access to the accountant, but you can walk into a bank, and if your name's on that account, they'll give you a copy of the statement. Same thing with credit cards. If you have joint credit card statements, you can call up, you can get a copy of the statements, see how much debt you have, right? Because it's not just about assets, it's about expenses and debts and liabilities too.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. So someone's come to you, you've given them this great advice, they've done their due diligence. I think that's the really important part, is that to make this, kind of go smoother, you need to do this. You can't just throw your hands up and say, I don't know, and not be part of the process. I think you need to be part of the solution here. So the person comes forward, they're doing, getting solution, things are getting bits and pieces together, but you kind of, now you're saying, okay, we're getting ready to kind of file, right? And so I would ask you there from your experience, once that person's ready, it's always very uncomfortable to be just served, right? To be served with
Right.
papers without any advance notice, but I guess every situation is different. What would you advise clients that have been proactive like this, you're kind of getting ready, that in a I'm not gonna say a perfect world, but the best situation, how did that initial kind of starting the process, what's your recommendation to hopefully make a very painful process less painful? How would you recommend they start it?
You starting the divorce process or starting piecing together your financial life? So
This is the after the financial life. This is the divorce process, right? They're ready to file. You tell me, maybe walk through some logistics here, like the importance of who's the first to file, or that process. Like how does that process start and work?
So, who's the first to file is kind of a personal opinion from attorney to attorney. Some attorneys like to be the petitioner because you get to go first if it goes to trial, and you get rebuttal and you get that. I think that is a great benefit. So there is certainly a benefit to being the first one to file. That being said, litigation is costly, it is time consuming, it is expensive, and it can be very emotional because it touches on not just one piece of your life, but every aspect of your life. It's your home, it's your kids, it's your finances, it's your retirement, it's your income. It touches on everything. So there are a couple different options when you're considering the divorce process. And when I have people come in for a consultation and they're ready to start actually filing for divorce, there's a couple different paths they can take. The first one is litigation, like we said. The other one is there's what's called collaborative law. So you actually can sit in a room, everyone has professionals, they all sit together, they all meet around a table, and it's a very open conversation. That does not work for every case. When it works very well. But when it doesn't, it can be very expensive and all the professionals are conflicted out. The other sort of hybrid model is what I like to call an uncontested. So in other words, we would put together, possibly if they're ready to, some sort of settlement proposal to send to the other side with a cover letter saying we've been retained, your spouse wants to keep this amicable, we want to keep fees reasonable, either contact us or have your attorney contact us within 10 days. And then from there, me and the other attorney can start discussing some informal financial discovery, some exchange of tax returns and bank account statements and income documents and that sort of stuff. And we can start there and make the process go a little bit smoother, try to keep it outside of court. More and more, to be honest, Steve, since COVID, people just want to go to court.
Really?
Interesting.
Why?
And I think,
Yeah.
I think it's because of this, because of Zoom, because you don't actually have to go to court. So you're not threatened with, oh my gosh, I have to look the judge in the eye and I have to actually answer his or her questions and I got to see my spouse in person. So there's some sort of level of protection or comfort, I think, that Zoom has offered people. So it is very litigious and the courts are very backed up, not just because more people filed for divorce as a result of COVID and being locked up in the house. And, some people lost their job, finances weren't the same. A whole host of issues have resulted in higher divorce filings, higher divorce rates over the past couple of years. But, when given the option to either go to court or try to settle, if it's on Zoom, I haven't seen anything like this in the past, but people are more willing to go to court now, probably because of this, honestly. So.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's interesting, right? I had to handle some very sensitive matters with one client actually, and that was the question: is could we get the message across? Actually, it wasn't that we needed to get across to the other party to basically get them feel that, listen, we really, this has been a tough situation. We want this to be settled. We want this to be handled. We feel really bad among strangers. This was among strangers, and we were actually successful at it. And I was very happy how it went. And we went through this process. But I totally see what you're saying there about that. Yeah. When you have the shield just right here, it's easier to do. So, but what that kind of stinks, right? That's tough, right? That's tough for everyone, right? That's tough for the system. Right. That's tough for the pocket and everything like that. And when you outline those those three, litigation, collaborative, and kind of the hybrid,
Right.
in hopes of trying to make it as pain-free as possible, what are some things that you've seen, some techniques, maybe some steps that were taken to maybe make it the hybrid, right? I understand the issue of if you go collaborative, it doesn't work out, and then there's been so much disclosure, you have to now hire new professionals because of that. I get it. What are some ideas of the hybrid that you've seen have worked well, and to maybe help diffuse a potential dangerous situation? I know many flammable, not dangerous, but flammable, incendiary situation that can be used that to kind of cool the waters a little.
Well, it starts with that initial letter. So, we're gonna send a letter depending on the situation, whether it's a divorce or maybe it's a custody case or a paternity case, that sort of stuff. We would send that letter and see if the other side's even open to it, right? If they're not open to it, if these parties cannot communicate at all, then it's just not gonna work. And so you really need to, it's not a one size fits all, right? So it's not a situation where you can just go online and pull the forms and figure it out on your own, because each case is so different and it's so specialized. It's a really unique area of the law in that sense, that what works for this person might not work for another person. And if you start it in that amicable way with that letter saying contact me or have your lawyer contact me, you can try to narrow some of the issues, you can try to keep it moving in the right direction. But there are people who just don't want to give discovery, and if they don't want to hand over the finances, or someone has a strong hold on the kids, or someone is not letting the other party in the house, whatever the situation is, sometimes people really just need a judge to tell them what to do. So I think as attorneys, you have an obligation to try to keep it amicable, to do what's in your client's best interest, but then there are other times where you may need to go to court. So you always start it off saying, here you go, here's what we want to do, and you start it. And if you can start that process in an amicable way, rather than just filing and serving and getting aggressive, unless of course the parties come to you and starting that amicable with the letter, it's just going to be a waste of their time.
Yeah,
because the other side's not going to respond, or maybe you have the client who is like, no, I absolutely cannot communicate with this person. We need to go to court, right? This is impossible, or whatever the situation is. And it's not that they're an impossible person, but it's just the relationship is at a point where they can't even talk about anything,
Yeah, that's tough. I totally appreciate that, and that's good advice. So, I don't want to go through the details of every aspect of the divorce process and everything, right? That we can be here for days and days.
Yeah.
But as you're moving, right. That's a whole separate one. But as you're moving through it, right, and I think one of the biggest goals of divorce is, okay, so listen, this has been awful, painful. I don't ever want to do this again. I want this to be finalized, right? I want this to be ended, right? I don't necessarily, I know you can't help it. I don't want modifications coming forward at a later date or anything like that. So what are some of maybe the items that as you go and as you near the end of hopefully what wasn't too painful of a process, but a very painful, many times is, as you mentioned, and they're kind of crossing T's and dotting I's. What would you say are some of the most important aspects of that final marital settlement agreement, or that final order that you kind of, they should be focusing on, they should be thinking about, to hopefully to say, hey, listen, we've crossed every bridge, and this is it.
Right. So it's very important to focus on the finances, right? So when it comes to division of assets, and I'm not talking about support's separate. When it comes to dividing your assets, dividing your bank accounts, dividing your retirement accounts, cars, houses, stuff like that, what you have to keep in mind is the court does not retain jurisdiction to set that aside. So if you are reaching an agreement, or if you're going to trial over distribution of assets, that is it. It is done. So make sure you are comfortable and you understand the agreement you are entering into, right? So you want to sit down with your attorney, with your accountant, with your financial advisor, and make sure you understand if you're going to get money from this divorce, if you're going to get assets from this divorce, how are they going to be used? How are you going to use them going forward? Some people get in the process and they're like, well, I just want alimony. I want alimony. I want alimony. And that's not always the best scenario for everyone. If you can get cash, if you can get liquid assets that you can invest, a couple $1,000,000, if you have that type of estate, if you have that type of assets built up, if you can get a couple $1,000,000 and invest that, and use that, or a lump sum payment, if you can use that to put that towards your own future, that might better serve you versus a limited alimony number or a limited term of alimony, or even permanent alimony. If someone retires, it's no longer permanent. So, you really want to be strategic and kind of think of it like a business deal. How are you going to live going forward? What is your financial life going to look like? And make sure you understand the agreement you're entering into, and you're not just getting money to get money, but you're getting the assets and the type of setup that you need to live going forward.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. I know alimony, the big A, right? That's always
Right.
the biggest number here.
It's one of the heaviest litigated areas of the law across the board, no matter what type of law you practice, is alimony. And it's crazy because there's no formula for it. Need and ability. Well, what is that? Right? There's no formula. It's not like child support where we actually have a mathematical formula for child support, but alimony is still very, very open, and people love it or they hate it. So it's very polarizing as well. It's a big one.
Yeah, Karen. So I know there's a lot of information, and this is an area, right? I don't know about, right? There's that concept of when the marriage has come to a certain number of years that it's quote unquote permanent alimony. But now speaking to you now, you say, well, you can lump sum that alimony out, right? And you can invest it and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of misinformation that goes out around permanent, what it means, permanent alimony and how it affects. Can you maybe just a high-end level overview of kind of what does that mean, like that permanent alimony, and how does that kind of differ?
Well, permanent alimony is typically for a marriage of 17 years or more. And if there's a marriage close to 17 years, maybe a little bit less, there's, special circumstances to have a permanent alimony award. And what that looks like is there's going to be a number that the paying spouse is going to pay indefinitely. That's the idea. But the reality of that situation is you have a right to retire. But the statute doesn't necessarily have that in it at this point in time. So the case law is a little bit all over the place. There's a Florida Supreme Court case from 1992, Pim versus Pim, that does allow you for the right to, when you reach retirement age, go in and seek a downward modification or termination of alimony, which is almost a disservice in some sense, because 10 years from now, 15 years from now, however old you are, you don't know what your life's going to look like. If you're relying on this alimony and then all of a sudden it's gone because the person paying is retiring, you could be in a very bad position. So if
or becomes disabled, right? If they get disabled, that will affect it.
Absolutely, that too. Or becomes disabled, or passes away, or there's life happens, right? Things happen, or they lose their job, right? Or they lose their job, or they're in a personal service business and something happens like COVID and they can no longer afford to pay. And so it gets modified. So anytime you're relying on someone else financially, there's always a big what if, right? And even more so with permanent alimony. So if you can say, let's say you have a husband who is 55 years old and he's going to retire in 10 to 15 years. You've been married for 18 years, you should get permanent alimony. If you can look at what that monthly number would be, and then kind of push it out for 10 years, if there's the ability there, whether it's from other assets, to give a lump sum, that way the receiving spouse can take that lump sum and invest it. In 10 years from now, these parties won't be back in court trying to figure out their financial life again, or God forbid, the husband doesn't make it to retirement and he passes away, or anything can happen, right? So the more control you have over your own financial future, the better. And I really believe that. And it's people sometimes think it's crazy when I say, look, let's think of other ways we can do this. How else can we set this up? But that really gives people the independence and the financial control over their own future. And that's the goal, because at the end of the day, two households can never live the same as one, but you want to make sure that you have a structure, you have the assets that make the most sense for you, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and yeah, that's where I would step in, right? Someone like me would step in. Hey, spouse, you're getting this lump sum. How does that look? And then I start having conversations, about them. And I know it can be very fearful for them because they were never the one to sit down with a financial advisor. They don't understand investments, right? So, like to say, for you, the attorney should get involved as soon as possible. Probably, they should get their financial advisor involved as soon as possible. And here's something actually that's come up for me, and I would love to hear your thoughts and opinion on this. And I kind of knew the answer, but I wasn't really sure. So there's a financial advisor that works with both spouses, right? They work with the husband and wife, right? And maybe it's gonna be a long-term relationship or whatever it might be. But I think it was tough. It's tough to imagine that at the end of this process, that one financial advisor, right, would continue to work with both people. I guess I'm sure it happens, but many times I see that it doesn't. So if a couple walked in to you, and let's say there is that one financial advisor amongst the two of them, what are the well, I'm sorry, it would not be a couple, right? It would be
right. I was going
one
to
of
say
them.
that.
I'm sorry.
I was to say,
That's me. That's my issue. The couple. One of them.
That's you,
one of
yeah.
them walks in. One of them walks in and asks you this. What is your guidance and kind of advice on that when they have that kind of central advisor there on their finances?
Well, it depends. So if I have the spouse who is going to be paying out money, so I have the spouse who goes to you and says, Steve, I owe my ex-spouse this much money from half of our assets, right? So they're probably going to want to stick with you because they know you, they've had the greater access to cash, they've had the greater access to wealth. They probably made the majority of the financial decisions. So in that situation, there's not much counseling that would need to be done other than talk to your advisor. This is what you need to do. This is what we've agreed to do to give to the other spouse. If you're going to be the receiving spouse, in other words, a spouse who hasn't set up the financial structures, who doesn't have as much access to the financial advisor, if you trust that person, if you trust that individual, there's no reason why they can't both stay with you, right? Unless there's something I'm not aware of legally, but there's no reason why they can't both stay with you and have their individual accounts. You're doing a great job for them. You have a structure, you're managing their money. They can absolutely, if they're comfortable, do that. And I know I've sent you people in the past where you have a spouse and they're receiving a nice sum of cash or money that needs to be invested, and they don't even know where to start, right? So for me, your firm is a very natural fit, especially if I have the spouse who's receiving money, because they need to have someone they can trust, someone they can go to, someone who's going to set them up. And be able to help them take that agreement we were talking about earlier. Here's your financial structure. This is how you're going to live your life. Now it's time to put it into action, right? And that's where either having an advisor you already know, or making sure that they get that introduction and that connection is made so they can start, and you can take that agreement and understand what they're getting and what the goal is, and you can move them through that process.
Yeah, it was really interesting for me. One of my favorite couples, right? Unfortunately, the time came, and they reached out to me after, they disclosed, before they hired attorneys and everything like that. And I tried to help them, right? I tried to somewhat mediate it and be that person. And granted, I'm an attorney, by trade as well, but really early on, I'm like, whoa, this is not doable. This is not going to work.
Yeah.
I need to get them. I need to step back and just advise them all to kind of get their attorneys and let them kind of hash it out. And I'll kind of be the information gatherer through the process. And yeah, I think naturally at the end of the process, one of the spouses did say, listen, I'm going to go independent. And I told him, listen, I totally appreciate that. That's I totally get it. Thanks for working with me in the past and items like that. But that was a real important factor to it, right? That the financial advisor and any kind of other advisor, really well-intentioned in where they represent both those parties. And we're not the attorney, right? I was not wearing my attorney hat because all kinds of conflict and disclosures come in there.
Yeah.
That even at that, it's best to kind of advise them to get their own representation. And if at the end of the situation, they could both work with you, great. But if not, that's part of the process also.
Yeah.
And it stinks, right? Because I lost a client I really, really liked also. But that's, everyone kind of, loses something in these situations.
Yeah. You lose one, you gain one in the next divorce, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you got it. So that's great. I think that's great advice about, when you're getting in there, the division of assets and you make that, try to make it as finalized as possible within there. I know I'm not going to go into the child custody items. That's really,
right.
That's a whole, another den there, there as well. So Karen, this has been, like I told you, I was excited for this conversation because I was going to learn as much as anybody else out there that might listen to it. So we've kind of gone through this process or anything like that. So just maybe in general and overall, when you have someone first comes to you or towards the end or a friend, came up to you, and asked you a question, what would be some general thoughts and advice that you would give them to try to help make this, from all your experience, make this as painless as possible?
As painless as possible. Well, it's not an easy process, but my advice would be start writing stuff down. Keep track of stuff, keep track of what you're spending, keep track of what your spouse is spending. You're gonna have to fill out what's called a financial affidavit. And people get these affidavits, and if they don't know the answers to the question, they take it, and I've seen people just set it aside and forget about it. Well, legally, you have to do this. You have to complete a financial affidavit. And if you're not able to complete it, it causes a lot of stress and it causes a lot of fear. So my advice would be write stuff down, make notes. You don't even necessarily need to write it down, but know what your finances are. It goes back to where we started. It all comes, at the end of the day, it comes down to money, right? And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that in how are we going to make money work for you? And in order to make money work for you, we need to know what you need. You don't know what you don't know. So ask questions, write stuff down, be a little inquisitive, start to understand stuff. When you get that tax return from your spouse, don't just sign it off and send it back. Look at it. Make a copy. It's your money too. You're allowed to do that. When credit card statements come in the mail, don't just throw it on the table and expect the other spouse to pay it. Open it up, go through it. Start doing little things like that, because the biggest part of this, if you want to be set up for success post-divorce, is it starts with the finances.
Yeah.
And it starts with having a plan to help you move forward financially, and it all comes down to that, right?
And I love that. I love that advice, Karen. And for anybody listening in, what I would add, get a little bit from my side of it, and what I've seen and what I've personally experienced, is that if the earlier possible you can sit down and go and understand your finances and go through that with your spouse and talk about them and try to take the emotional charge as much out of it as possible, and talk through it, like, why do you feel this way? Where this is what I feel when you do that, and this is what I feel when you do that. If you can put that hard work in, really that hard work in, and have those discussions and go through those finances, I will promise that will so raise the chances of you not getting divorced and you staying together. Because a lot of the people, right, you think, well, I have problems here, I'm just ready to throw this out and start anew. Well, guess what? When you start anew, same problems are going to come up. Same issues are going to be there, right? All the challenges you have as a couple is not unique to you, right? Everyone is having these conversations. Everyone's having these challenges. So I love that advice, and that could be, maybe part of potentially solving. And so you don't have to go down this path, or even I'll add it to another degree. As far as honestly, my wife and I went one time, and this was huge. This was discharging to say, if we ever did get divorced, this is how it would look.
Right.
These are how the numbers would look, and everything like that. And then once you do that, and you've kind of envisioned, and you've gone through in a calm way, you're still in love with the person, you've gone through that process, and you've outlined how divorce would look, it kind of takes the fear and the unknown away.
Right.
And it allows you just to focus on the relationship, which was an unbelievable exercise we did. I'd recommend that to anybody. But it's so much is about the finances, and I get it.
And I think that's great advice actually as well. It's take the emotion out of it, which is never 100% possible. There's always going to be some emotional attachment or fear or excitement attached to money. It's money. That's what it is, right? It moves everything. But if you can take that out of it and almost treat it like a business conversation, your marriage, your house, your family, you need to run it, and you need to have your financial tools in place. So if you can have that conversation, I think that's great. And when we do prenups, we send people a letter of, here are things to discuss. And a lot of it is finances. So going into a marriage, if you can have that conversation before marriage, even better, right?
Yeah.
But if you're already married, I think that's a great advice, is to have that conversation. And if your marriage does fall apart, you've already had that conversation, and you have a much better understanding of what you're going to need. So
to equate this in the business concept to one of the best pieces of advice I ever heard is that, imagine you're running a business, right? And you're the management of a business, and you're sitting there in the room, and imagine you all collectively, right, at that same time got fired, right? What would the people that come in after you what would they do? What would they say that you did wrong? What would they do different? What were the mistakes and everything like that? And they say, have that conversation. And then they say, and I heard this with a story, a large corporation. And then you say that group, right? You stand up, you leave the room, and then you come back as that new group, right? You fired the old group and then do that, right? And so, hey, listen, we don't have to be fired. So that was a really interesting story and explanation that I saw. So Karen, listen, this has been tremendous. Like I said, this has kind of been my favorite ones because of the information, right? It's so practical, so it's so applicable. And I really thank you for your time and you're spending with me today. And I hope anyone listening to this finds this beneficial.
Yeah, well, Steve, it was a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. It's always great. And I hope we were able to answer some people's questions and give them a little bit more information about how to make decisions going forward.
Yeah, I'll put all your information in the notes wherever people listen to this or see this. You'll want to reach out to you as well. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you.